Okay. Hello. This is a hopefully short video kind of tutorial slash tips and tricks video for mom, Jen's mom, beyond mom, whatever you like to call her. If anyone else watches this, hopefully it helps you too. Um, so I'll mostly talk about things that are helpful in Salmon Run. If you'd like me to talk about ranked mode tips, strategies, and stuff, just let me know. For the current rotation, today is March 11th, 2022, and there's about 11 hours left in the bucket rotation, so we'll talk a little bit about the buckets. The first one is the Slosher. The Slosher, like a mid-range bucket. Actually, it goes pretty far. I guess you could still call that mid-range. Medium speed, doesn't take up too much ink when you slosh a lot. The main thing about the weapon that you might want to keep in mind is that not only can you hit enemies directly with your sloshes, but you can also drop the ink on them. And in Salmon Run, I think there's a certain point where the damage goes down if you drop it on them, like that. But in Salmon Run, it all stays the same amount of damage. So this is good because you can hit multiple enemies with the sloshers. Like if I do that, I can hit 2 enemies at the same time. Because everything that lands on them will do damage. So this is helpful for the normal salmon, like the small fry and the chum and the cohocs. Instead of trying to hit them one at a time, just aiming directly at them, what I like to do if there's like a crowd of them, I aim high. So I hit multiple of them at the same time. This weapon doesn't do like a ton of damage to them, so it's helpful that if you can utilize hitting more than one at a time. If you angle too high, your shots won't go as far, so keep that in mind too. If I go over here, they'll hit both of them, kind of. Dummies. It takes a little practice, and if you watch me play Slosher and Salmon Run, you'll kind of get sick because it's kind of like a roller coaster. I keep tilting up and shooting while going back down. So if that makes you motion sick, don't do it. The second tip for Slosher is that when you're aiming high for a slosh, you can preemptively shoot your weapon at an enemy, like let's say a steelhead for example. So if a steelhead's getting ready to make its head thing big, or its head bomb thingy, before it actually shows up for it to hit, you can slosh ahead of time so that you can do damage to it sooner. And then that makes the window less tight to killing it in one cycle. It takes 3 slosher hits to kill in one cycle, and if you do it right when it starts doing it, then it's like a pretty tight window. But if you do a slosh ahead of time, then it'll give you some extra time. In terms of other enemies, I don't think there's any special tips. It's not a super strong weapon, but it does a decent amount of damage, has good amount of range, and yeah. That's it for the Slosher. The Blob is probably the strongest weapon in the rotation. You get like 4 separate hits of 30 damage. I don't know what the damage is for salmon, but it's really strong. And there's not too much to this. You can't really do the same thing with Blob that you can do with Slosher hitting multiple enemies. But the single enemy damage is like plenty, so you can just keep pressing the button and hitting them. The cool thing about the blob is that it bounces off of walls. So if you get your angles right, you can hit enemies like that. And there are some ramps in spawning grounds that have walls where it might be a tight space and you can't like directly attack the enemy, so you could just bounce your blobs off the wall. I guess the key thing about this weapon is don't think about aiming too much all the time. Just having a lot of bubbles going around can create a lot of chaos and help you out just hit enemies that you need to hit. So just keep mashing the button. You can kind of do the same thing with steelheads, where you can shoot your blobs before it starts warming up its head. But I think it's a little trickier with this weapon, because there's like a specific angle depending on how far you are and stuff like that. But this is definitely, I'll say, the sploosh of the rotation, because the sploosh does like a lot of damage and this does a lot of damage. So you can't really go wrong as long as you keep attacking. You'll do great. The next one is the Explosher, and this is a very tricky weapon, so I won't go into too many details because it can be very complex. But one of the main components about it is that it paints areas really well, so if like you can't paint your feet, or if you have a lot of enemy ink around you, if you paint your feet, it paints a really big area. Let me reset. It's a good amount of space. Like, let's say there's a Moz coming after you, and of course Moz paint your feet right when they're under you. Before they jump up, you can paint your feet and then move away and then throw a bomb at them. So that's a sprinkler. The Exploshers hits have two zones. There's the direct hit, which I guess does 55 damage. And there is the splash damage, where if you hit any like flat surface next to an enemy, they'll do damage. So what a lot of Explosher players try to do in both PvP and Salmon is when you're aiming for an enemy, try to aim low so that you're hitting both the direct and the ground to get even more damage. And I play Explosher in ranked, so I'm pretty used to how it works and the distances and stuff. Just something you have to get used to. Another special thing about the Explosher is it can take out fly fish baskets, which I'm sure you know already, but I'll mention it again. That instead of like the Grisco Slosher where you aim for the pilot, for this you just aim for each basket, just as if you're throwing a bomb into the basket. And it will take it out really quickly, so it's very useful in any sort of comp to take care of fly fish. The last thing about Explosher that I want to talk about is that when you're sloshing on the ground, your mobility is really slow. So what a lot of players do is jump while they're sloshing, and that increases your mobility a little bit. It's helpful if like you're swimming and then you jump, you'll keep your swim momentum and be able to move how you want. Rather than just walking on the ground and sloshing it, you get a little stiff. Keep in mind though that when you are jumping and sloshing, the aim is a little bit different. So it might take a little getting used to aiming again when you're jumping and sloshing compared to just normal sloshing. And I guess in a geometry sense, for angles trying to hit the enemy on the ground, jumping gives you like a slightly better angle. I don't know. I haven't done the math or anything for it, but it feels good to jump and shoot at the same time. And yeah, that's the basic stuff about the Explosher. And the last weapon... Oh, it's my favorite weapon. If I can find it. Probably at the end. It's the heavy Splatling. I'm sure you know how Splatlings work. You hold the charge until your circles are full, and then you let go to shoot. A nice trick is that once you let go and start shooting, you can hold the button down again. It won't give you any more charge, but you'll automatically start charging as soon as you run out of bullets. So that can be useful rather than thinking too much about when are my bullets gonna end, stuff like that. The most helpful thing I can say about the heavy Splatling is learning about partial charges, where you charge for a short amount of time to at least get some bullets out. It won't be like the maximum amount. And this can help you get out of jams if there's like a bunch of enemies around you, or if you need to get out of enemy paint, get away from like flyfish missiles and stuff. And a partial charge, a good amount is actually, that's a good question. How much is a good amount? I guess if you're looking at your circle in the middle, it's about when it gets to halfway, which goes by pretty quick. But I think I mentioned before with bamboo, it's like a gentle squeeze and let go. Not necessarily a tap. The tap shots aren't great. But yeah, just a short, gentle squeeze and let go. This is useful in PvP because in that short amount of time you can take out an enemy if all your shots hit. But yeah, what else was I gonna say about heavy Splatling? My joke with heavy Splatling and playing against people in PvP, that heavy Splatlings are like Batman. You shouldn't attack them when they're prepared. So making sure you're prepared ahead of time for situations, like charging before you get somewhere if you plan on shooting something, or making sure you have enough space is pretty important for helping you stay alive and stuff like that. Oh, the one thing I wanted to mention, which is kind of a general tip for shooters, is if you haven't noticed this yet, but when you have your circle on a target and there's that like little X on it, that means you are in range. If I go back here, I am not in range. And my shots will not hit. Or they'll barely hit. But as long as that X is there, it's in range or will do damage. And that's good to know for certain enemies in Salmon Run, like scrappers especially. Because if you have your circle on a scrapper, but it's on the front of the scrapper, the X won't show, it'll just be a circle. But anytime that it's able to hit the tail, which is where you actually do damage, the X will show. I guess the X's are super helpful for playing... If I can find... Playing chargers and learning about the ranges of chargers. So you'll see that X when you can hit certain enemies. And I probably will talk about that in the next video when there's E leader in the rotation. But anyways, I think that's everything I wanted to talk about really quickly. Not necessarily a super beginner, like teaching you mechanics and stuff, unless you're interested in that, but just general things about the weapons. And ooh, 15 minutes, good timing. Hopefully this helps you. Okay. That's it for me. Bye bye.